Well, good evening. My name's Pete Rogalski. I'm the Public Works Director here at the City of Richland, and we're pleased to have you join us for our one and perhaps our last virtual open house here at the city. We have a long tradition of sharing our work and asking for public input on our transportation and other projects, and we're bending that practice this year due to the pandemic, and perhaps it won't be too much longer and we'll be able to get back to our normal way of doing this. Tonight, we want to share with you the products of three separate planning exercises that began last year and have each in their own way probably planning on making a significant impact and significant improvement to the city's transportation and network. We have three different consulting firms. So the city issued contracts to three different entities based on their specific expertise as it aligned to the projects that we were asking them to look at. And so we have representatives of each of those professional consulting engineering teams with us here this evening. Each of them have prepared a pre-recorded package of information about the work that they did. And then each of them have people live here with us to answer questions and interact with the public in our best approximation to what we would do in a live in-person event. So those are Brandon Blankenagel representing KPFF as a consultant that worked on the Island View to Vista Field project. Julie Trudeau and Uday Marapali led an effort from Jacobs Engineering on the SR 240 Aaron project. And Jeff Peters is here representing the Lochner Group that's worked on the South George Washington Way project. So what we're going to do is we're going to play in that order. First, the Island View to Vista Field, and then SR 240 Aaron, and then South George. We're going to play this pre-recorded content. They last anywhere from they're on the order of 15 minutes long each. And then when those sessions are over, we'll have an interactive session whereby attendees to the open house can pose questions to the consultant teams and get live answers. We've made provision to take your input or have that interaction in two different means. So you can type a question into the Zoom chat feature at any point in the presentation, and we have somebody monitoring those chat entries, and those can form one way of giving us a heads up about what your issue is or concern or question, and we'll go to those first. And then if you want to speak live to the team, you can use the raised hand feature, and the moderator of our meeting will assist you in getting unmuted at the right time and speaking to the group. So we're going to go through those in that order I mentioned just a minute ago, and look forward to our participation. Thank you again for being here. So at this point, I'll ask Mark to step in and share his screen and start that first presentation.
Well, good evening. My name is Brandon Blankenagel, and I'm with KPFF Consulting Engineers. We've been commissioned to do this Island View to Vista Field trail study, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you today. It's been quite a pleasure to do this study with the cities of Richland and Kennewick. So tonight I'm going to share with you just a basic history of the project, where it comes from, why we're doing it, what our role as the consultant team was, and some of the benefits that this project will ultimately achieve, where we're headed with it, and what things we did within the study that will guide those benefits. As we sort of wrap up the presentation, I'll be talking about how the planning aspects of this and the public outreach are important to the study. And then we'll talk about the current status of some of these projects and the next steps to carry forward. So in general, this project is meant to create an action plan of projects that will ultimately achieve that link between Island View and Vista Field. And so that's the basic goal. And this is something that's been on the minds of the transportation planners and engineers for quite some time. It's in each of these agency transportation plans for the region. So our role as the consultant team between KPFF and ALTA Planning and Design was to provide the guidance that's needed to really develop an action plan of this nature, to look at all the different streets and the network and how they interplay and guide toward a certain location on SR 240 where we can bridge across. So the project benefits in general is what we're looking at. We actually set up some study objectives really meant to guide how we would achieve the goals and just clarifying what those goals were. So in general, we wanted to find a safe and really easily followed network of streets, whether it be bike or pedestrian facilities, sidewalks and trails, to connect from the south end of the study area to the north end of the study area. And also east-west, because we found that that's an important aspect of this, this area. It's kind of split between major streets and highways. So we also have as that secondary objective to find a bridge location over SR 240 and then develop an implementation plan for how we create this on the ground. And then eventually set the cities up to gain funding through grants. So to begin with here, we're looking at the sidewalk gaps. And so one thing that we discovered was there's certain pocket neighborhoods that were probably built in a certain time frame when sidewalks weren't required or, you know, based on certain standards. So those dark orange streets are those that have no sidewalks on them. And then the lighter yellow lines you can see represent streets that have sidewalk on one side. Those are generally in areas that are still under development. And the expectation is that, you know, those sidewalks will be filled in over time as development occurs and as appropriate. When we look at the bicycle network, on the other hand, these are the facilities that are in place. And so it's a wider network. It's not as tight as you see, you know, on the sidewalks. You try to see them on every street, but for the bike facilities, we look at them every quarter mile at least. And these are the facilities that are in place. You'll notice there's certain colors here. Yellow are the bike routes as determined presently. Those are facilities that have a widened shoulder along the side of the street, but not necessarily a bike lane with symbols that indicate that's your space. And then the blue lines indicate areas where there is a bike lane, and the green lines indicate trails or paths. We looked at this as a view of what is the level of stress that is experienced when you bicycle on these streets. And so just to give a basic understanding of what I mean by that, we indicate that by the letters LTS, level of traffic stress. And it's a scale of 1 to 4. And if you're on a level of stress 1, LTS 1 street, this is one that's comfortable for all ages and abilities. This is one that a family is not afraid to take their children down. And so this is probably a very low traffic residential street or a separated trail where there's no chance of traffic issues. Whereas in LTS 4, the other end of the scale is a high traffic, very low facility service, whether that's just a shoulder, no bike lane. And really your hardiest of riders are the ones that are going to be comfortable there. If they are comfortable, that might even be a challenge to state. So looking at those ratings then on this map again, you can see that the red lines represent streets that are high traffic and low level of service for the bike lane facility that's there. And so you can see Steptoe here is red and Gage is red. But you see in general, there's a lot of yellowish orange on this map. And that indicates this level of traffic stress 3. Again, those are your streets that have a widened shoulder, but it's not necessarily a bike lane. There's moderate traffic levels there. And part of the recommendations from this study would elevate that from a LTS 3 to an LTS 2. That's, the lower number is the higher condition, better condition. So our next step was to look at the planned bicycle network. And these are all the streets that show up on the bike network plans for the city and the county and the region. You'll notice that, again, it's about a quarter-mile spacing between all of these, but then you have this interesting line that goes straight across all of this. And that's to indicate the future bridging and connection to a trail. Again, this is the planned view. It's not exact, it's not perfect. And as we began to look at where a bridge might best be placed over SR 240, we decided to also look to the east of Columbia Center Boulevard and the interchange there, and see if there weren't opportunities to connect down to the Columbia Park area as well. And as we analyzed the network, we found that these streets shown in dark blue really are the key carriers for the general network. So we're recommending, in the end, some improvements to these network lines and the segments here. But then we also looked at two possibilities for a network. One that caters to the east and that possible bridge alignment here to the east. And we called that our Kellogg network because it's based on this Kellogg alignment lining up and going into the neighborhood. We also looked at a western alignment, which we called the Center Parkway network. And that's one that comes up here and lines up across the railroad and then lines up with this western connection over SR 240. So these are the streets as we would recommend them in terms of the level of traffic stress as well. And again, as I mentioned earlier, all of these streets that were orange in the existing condition, we recommend treatments that would bring them up to an LTS 2, this green level. And important to this whole aspect is having some LTS 1 connections, this light blue and the dark blue that take us up to the river. And so any trip that may start in this Vista Field area has a short LTS 2 trip, and then it connects on an LTS 1 facility for the rest of the route. This segment here may be LTS 2, LTS 1, depending on how the facility is built in the end. One aspect that I want to point out here are these yellow lines. These are proposed bridge locations. And we looked at several options for how to make the bridge connection over SR 240. So these are different alignments that we reviewed in great detail. I also want to point out that we looked at ways to bridge over Columbia Center Boulevard. And so these are two areas where we looked at that option. So I have a couple of renderings that show what those two bridges might look like, this western alignment and this Columbia Center Boulevard alignment, because those are the two that scored best in our analysis. So this is the west alignment over SR 240. And again, this is a mock-up. This is a drawing of what it might look like. We would come in over the canal at a low level over the canal, and then we'd have to be at least 18 feet above the surface of the highway as we cross over, and then dropping down at a gentle slope that allows people to travel up and down relatively easily into that alignment. And then just pointing out that this bridge is about 240 feet long. But you can see it's dropping continually. There's an elevation drop from Tapteel down across the freeway and into the neighborhood here to the north. When we look at the Columbia Center Boulevard alignment, this is looking north as if you're traveling north along Columbia Center Boulevard. You've got the mall here to the left, and that Keene Trail would extend across and come in across the north side of the mall parking lot, and then enter this bridge. And you'd be a certain height over the roadway, probably at least 16 feet. And then it would curve and come down Colorado Street until it dropped to the right elevation, and then it would enter into the street there as a bicycle boulevard, as I indicated earlier. So again, this is kind of the final image of the proposed network. And what we indicate should be the ideal for the cities as they strive to improve the network in terms of what kind of level of traffic stress they should be looking to accomplish when they build these network items. So now I want to kind of go through some of the treatments on the ground and what they look like to create that condition for an LTS1 or an LTS2, LTS3. So here is our recommendation for how to improve upon these streets listed on the left, Center Boulevard or Center Parkway, Grand Ridge Boulevard, and so forth. This includes a bicycle lane, as you can see indicated by the marker and the arrow. This is, you know, your lane where the bicyclist should be traveling, and a buffer space between that lane and the vehicle lane. And this is important to provide, you know, a greater level of comfort for the cyclist and also for the driver when they don't have to worry about how close they are to that cyclist in the roadway. When we look at this in terms of most of the streets in that network, the space available would allow for a 5-foot bicycle lane on each side of the road with 2-foot buffer width, 11-foot travel lanes for the vehicles, and 12-foot center turn lane. That's pretty common spacing and sizing across the nation when we consider common facilities of this type. And it fits for the most part on a lot of those streets. Now, there are some pinch points that would have to be, you know, studied in greater detail in terms of the design aspects, but generally that could be improved greatly for the network. When we look at the Keene Trail alignment, one very critical element of this whole network is bringing the Keene Trail in across Steptoe. This is where it dead ends. If you were looking east along this alignment, you just see this open abandoned railroad corridor. And so connecting through that corridor over to Center Parkway and on across again, you know, to the north side of the mall parking lot to this proposed bridge over Columbia Center Boulevard and then on to Colorado Street. So that connection is critical to creating the east-west transfer of people. You know, if you're coming from the neighborhood to the west and you're trying to get across to Vista Field, this is a key crossing point. As well as if you're trying to get from Vista Field up to the north, you're coming across and jumping on the trail to the north. And as we extend further east, this is Umatilla and Colorado Street, looking at that bicycle boulevard condition. So this light blue indicates a bicycle boulevard, which is again a very low traffic street that you know, people feel very comfortable walking and biking on. In my site visits there, I saw people of all ages and abilities out there on this street already. So it already sort of serves in that purpose, but it's a great candidate for some formalization. If we were to put some symbols down and sign it and indicate to all users that this is a space for multimodal transportation, for active transportation. Also key to this aspect is to bring in some better crossing facilities for pedestrians and cyclists at key locations that would then connect into the greater network. And lastly, I want to point out that while we can create all these great segments of streets that have facilities on them, if we don't treat the intersections well, we sort of leave all the gaps still in place. There's presently a lot of gaps at intersections, and that's partly because they're the most challenging areas to treat, and also because there's space limitations and costs that are associated with those. And so while you may be able to fit facilities along the segments, carrying them through is challenging. And so, for instance, here at Columbia Center Boulevard and Grand Ridge, where we have these two right turn lanes, maybe there's an option to do a shared bicycle through and right turn only facility that carries on through, just to give a little more space and attention to the active transportation elements of these intersections. And there might be better ways to accommodate those, but the important aspect here is that we don't leave the intersections untreated. So how does this all come together? We have been working closely with what we call the Public Advisory Committee. These are representatives from the community in special interest groups or agencies that have an interest in this subject area. We met with these folks twice, once to kind of go over the goals and initiative, the process that we were going to work through, and to gather their input on what exists on the street today. And then a second time earlier this year to discuss the progress of the work and our recommended alternatives. Kind of went through the analysis on those alternatives and pointed out how and why we would recommend going to that Center Boulevard alternative as the final, as our final recommendation. So here we are, we've been through our study period from May of 2021 through, we're now in February of 2022. This is our public open house. And as we conclude and draw your comments in on this study, then we'll wrap them into the final reports and get that delivered. So what is the project status? When we look at this study area, there's a lot of development that is presently underway or has been underway. And as we look at future development and options, we really want the city to have in hand this master plan that says, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And then they can work with the developers and encourage those improvements to be included where appropriate with their developments. And then also the cities can focus on these treatments as they seek grants and start to begin linking the trail and roadway segments to improve biking and walking in the area. So in terms of the study, we'll be gathering feedback from this public outreach engagement and wrapping those into our final report. And part of that report will include an implementation plan. What are some of the priorities in terms of those gaps in the network that need to be treated first and will be of the highest impact, and then which ones should come next. And so we'll assemble that plan and wrap this up into a final report, and that should conclude the Island View to Vista Field Trail study.
Well, thank you, Brandon. That was a great presentation. And we've come to the point in the meeting where we can take questions. I'll ask Sabrina if anything has come in on the chat at this point.
No questions so far.
Okay. Are there any attendees that would like to ask Brandon a question about the effort he went through?
Where? Raise my hand.
I see a hand up for Mr. or Mrs. Berkowitz. Can you enable them, Sabrina?
Yes, they're unmuted. They can go ahead and ask.
Brandon, could you comment on active transportation through the Steptoe roundabout and how that might fit into the plan? I know it's a little bit west of the proposed bridge, but it's really a showstopper for a lot of people coming back and forth between Richland and Kennewick.
Sure. So that's the roundabout where Steptoe meets with Columbia Park Trail. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting as we looked at the background information, the existing uses for people traveling through the area. It's actually a highly used intersection for cycling and some walking. I think it's less used in terms of walking just for its distance from destinations. But on the cycling side, it does have a higher usage. And there's certainly challenges when you are looking at a roundabout from a cycling point of view. There are ways that roundabouts can be improved for cyclists, and that would certainly be a recommendation if those improvements are possible in the future. But in general, as you could see in the network that I displayed earlier, really we would guide people to more comfortable facilities if possible. Now, not all routes cater to going on different facilities, but that's where we would point to if you're traveling in an east-west direction, maybe aiming to the Keene Trail and that connection across in the future. But we would also continue to encourage the cities to look at ways to improve the existing facilities like Steptoe and Columbia Park Trail.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else come in on chat, Sabrina? I'm not seeing any other hands raised of our attendees.
No, Pete, I think we're good. I think we can move on.
Okay. I do want to point out that something I forgot to say earlier is that each of these studies has a presence on the city's website with some of the study products, and should be able to navigate there pretty easily on the website if we want to do a little bit more reading and see some of the visual products that these teams have produced. So the next project and presentation we're going to hear from is the Jacobs engineering team about the SR 240 Aaron improvements. And that's the intersection immediately behind Fred Meyer that most people in town are familiar with as being a significant congestion choke point. And we got some funding from our regional planning organization, similarly to the Island View to Vista Field project. We signed an MOU with the Washington State Department of Transportation, who is the manager and owner of SR 240, to go about this study in a collaborative manner. And Jacobs Engineering did a really good job of facilitating that partnership and leading us to a good outcome. So with that, I'd ask Mark to go ahead and queue up the presentation for that Jacobs engineering team, and we'll go through the same routine again. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete and the City of Richland, for giving us this opportunity to tell the public more about our work to propose a solution to the traffic congestion at the SR 240 Aaron Drive interchange. In this video, we'll start with introductions from some of the project team members, give a high-level overview of the problem, the solution we're recommending, and why we're making this recommendation. Some of the graphics we're using in this presentation are from Google Earth and Google Trademark materials. After the video, Uday Maripali, who you'll meet shortly, will be available to answer your questions. Here are some of the team members who've been working on this project over the past year or so. Julie, why don't you get the introduction started, and then we'll hear from Mark, Uday, and Betsy, and I'll close out the introductions.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone, and good evening. My name is Julie Trudeau, and I'm a project manager for Jacobs Engineering Group, and I'm just really excited to be here this evening with my team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Bandy, and I'm also with Jacob. I'm also excited to be here to talk about the project, and I helped lead the traffic engineering and transportation analysis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Uday Maripalli. I am with Jacobs as well, and I help do the traffic operations analysis and safety analysis on this project.
Hello, I'm Betsy Phoebus, and I'm Jacobs' environmental lead for this project team. I led the preliminary analysis of potential environmental issues, such as impacts to biological, cultural, and water resources, as well as an inventory of recreational facilities.
And I'm Jenny Thacker. My job on this project has been to help plan the community outreach, like this meeting, and I'm so glad you're all here today. And with that, I'll hand it off to Julie to tell us more about the problem this project is trying to fix.
Thank you, Jenny. So just a bit of background, Richland is a growing city geographically constrained between the Yakima and Columbia rivers. Major employment centers like Hanford and the Calic Region Medical Center add to the volume of vehicles moving through the city. While there are large traffic volumes headed in and out of the city at different times of the day, traffic congestion peaks at intersections near the interstate in the afternoon. And there are also two main routes in and out of the city to manage all of this traffic: George Washington Way and SR 240. This creates a lot of problems, especially where SR 240 intersects with Aaron Drive, and traffic volumes in and out of Central and North Richland are projected to continue to increase in the future, further intensifying congestion and delays. And where traffic congestion increases, so does the potential for increased traffic collisions. So today you'll hear from my team, who will address the need for improvements at Aaron Drive along SR 240 and how those improvements address safety and congestion for all transportation users. This includes cars, freight, pedestrian, and bicyclists. The purpose of the project is to look at ways to solve those problems, and in doing so, increase mobility for freight and commuter traffic, increase safety for freight and commuter traffic, and take advantage of this work to resolve an existing gap in the pedestrian and bike facilities between Central Richland and the regional trail system that provides access to the waterfront recreational facilities, to the South Richland developments, and to Kennewick and Pasco. We had a lot of technical experts and engineers thinking about the problem, but our collaborative efforts to solve the issues at Aaron Drive has also been inclusive, with participation by the Federal Highway Administration, Washington State Department of Transportation, Benton Franklin Council of Government, other key stakeholders, and the general public, so we could get everyone's perspective. A most recent support team that we put together met in March, June, and November of this last year to discuss this area at Aaron Drive. And this work builds on two earlier studies, the WashDOT SR 240 integrated scoping study and the city's regional north-south travel capacity project, both looking at the entire SR 240 corridor. Up next, you'll hear from Uday, who will explain the current congestion issues and safety.
Thank you, Julie. Now let's take a closer look at the issues that this project is trying to solve. The first issue Richland asked us to look at was ways to ease congestion at this interchange, especially during the afternoon drive time when it starts to get congested. SR 240 is a major transportation route that is surrounded by densely built section of neighborhoods, commercial districts, and public spaces. The traffic volumes into and out of Central and North Richland are projected to increase in the future, which will only make the congestion worse in the future. One of the main issues is that all traffic on SR 240 needs to go through a signalized intersection at Aaron Drive, whether those vehicles are continuing on SR 240 or turning into Richland. That means the traffic backs up on SR 240 as vehicles encounter the light. Typically, this happens during the evening rush hour, but drivers could encounter it at other times throughout the day. This also leads to safety issues. Part of our role was to collect crash data from 2016 to 2020. And we discovered that between 2016 and 2020, there were 93 total crashes reported at this intersection. 33 crashes resulted in injuries and 60 were limited to property damage only, which is approximately 1/3 of the collisions that have resulted in injuries. The other issue that we were asked to solve with this project is to improve active transportation facilities along Aaron Drive. Active transportation network refers to trails, sidewalks, and paths that let people get around without using car or other motorized vehicle. The Aaron Drive SR240 intersection is a prime area for active transportation. It connects residential and shopping areas to the north and east with Yakima River and Chumna Natural Preserve to the west. The green lines on the map show existing pedestrian trails located on either sides of SR240. As you can see, currently SR240 and the SR240 Aaron Drive intersection are substantial barrier between residential and commercial properties located along Aaron Drive and the regionally connected trails along Yakima River. The SR240 Aaron Drive intersection does not provide any active transportation connectivity through it, and the Aaron Drive segment approaching this intersection does not have any bicycle or pedestrian facilities. Currently, pedestrians and cyclists who want to access the trails along Yakima River and Chamna Natural Preserve need to travel northwest via multi-use path on SR240 and cross at Dupotel Street and then travel south, or travel east on Aaron Drive and cross SR 182 at Jadwin Avenue and then travel west on Carrier Road. Both routes are approximately 1.5 miles long and require crossing multiple intersections and driveways. Up next, Mark Bandy will discuss the alternatives evaluated to solve the traffic congestion and safety concerns.
Thanks, Uday, for describing the problems that we're trying to solve. On this slide, we show the alternatives that we came up and evaluated with to solve for those issues, and they're listed on the right side of the slide here. At the top, you'll see the no build listed, and that just refers to leaving things as they're configured today. And that's what we compare other alternatives to. We also have two solutions that are both including a southbound grade separation for SR240 going over I-182. And they're paired with either a traffic signal at Aaron Drive and 240 like there is today, or it's paired with a roundabout. And then we also, we'll go into this in more detail in just a minute, including the non-motorized trail connection that will solve for the gap. On this slide, we're showing how we evaluated the alternatives, comparing them to the current configuration. We evaluated the alternatives in three primary categories: mobility, using intersection delay as a measure, safety, using crashes per mile as the measure, and economic vitality, using freight travel time as the measure. We also compared the estimated cost of the two alternatives. Our evaluation was based on traffic volumes, both in the near term, as well as looking at future volumes 20 years from now. And in order to simplify this analytical comparison, we used a relative rank of improvement compared to the current configuration. So in the table where you see a single plus symbol, that means that an alternative performed somewhat better than the current configuration. And if you see two pluses, that means the alternative performed considerably better. You'll see that both alternatives performed considerably better in both the mobility and safety categories, and they perform better in the economic vitality category, with the roundabout at Aaron Drive and SR240 performing a bit better than a traffic signal. In the cost category, you can see that the alternatives are similar in their construction costs, with the grade separation plus roundabout being slightly higher. But as I just noted, this alternative does perform better in reducing freight travel time through the intersection. So based on those evaluation results, the preferred solution is to move forward with a southbound grade separation and a roundabout at the intersection. In addition, we would build a multi-use path that would connect from Aaron Drive down to the Yakima River Trail. And you can see those elements here, and we're now going to go through them in more detail, beginning with Uday.
Thank you, Mark. You can see the southbound SR240 grade separation running from left to the right in the middle of the graphic, which is also labeled as southbound bypass. This new alignment would begin north of Aaron Drive and rejoin the ramp onto I-182 in the same manner as today. The revised intersection of SR240 and Aaron Drive as a roundabout is shown in the center of the graphic. And you can see the multi-use path connected from Aaron Drive through the roundabout and connecting to existing path along Yakima River. This preferred solution is anticipated to provide significant improvement to traffic operations. The traffic traveling on southbound SR 240 to eastbound 182 can bypass Aaron Drive intersection. This will result in lower delays and shorter queuing along both southbound and northbound SR 240 approaches at Aaron Drive. The Aaron Drive approach at this intersection is also anticipated to see an improvement in form of reduced delay and shorter queues. In addition, the travel times for freight along SR 240 will also be improved. Here's a close-in view of what the roundabout would look like. With grade separation in place, the traffic volumes at this intersection would be more balanced between SR 240 and Aaron Drive. In this type of situation, roundabouts move traffic more efficiently because vehicles aren't having to stop. In terms of safety, roundabouts are typically found to have fewer injury and fatal crashes compared to traffic signals. Lastly, roundabouts frequently cost less to maintain over long term compared to traffic signals. Now, Betsy would talk in detail about multi-use path. Over to you, Betsy.
Thanks, Uday and Mark, for clearly presenting the possible solutions the city has evaluated for this project. One of the key elements in each solution is a new multi-use path and trail system connection. You can see the proposed route of the new multi-use path along the yellow line on this aerial map. From north to south, the new path would start at a currently unnamed bike path near the Aaron Drive intersection with Wellesian Way. It would run south along Aaron Drive on the existing bridge over the SR 240 ramp and then through the intersection with SR 240. South of SR 240, the trail would make its way under the future grade separated southbound bypass and finally under the existing Port of Benton Railroad to connect with paths along the Yakima River and in the Shamna Natural Preserve. The city can make this connection happen with the new grade separation and also by reconfiguring the ramp between SR 240 and Interstate 182 West. The ramp would be modified to go through the Aaron Drive intersection. These modifications will allow the city to provide a protected crossing through SR 240, through I-182, and beneath the rail line for pedestrians and bicyclists and other non-motorized users. The primary benefit of this new path is a more direct connection between trail systems in central Richland to trails along the Yakima River and in the Shamna Natural Preserve. As Uday described earlier, the current routes between trail systems require non-motorized users to travel 1.5 miles to access the preserve and the river from Aaron Drive. This new connection would shorten the route to just 1/10 of a mile. In addition, this protected multi-use path would be at least 10 feet wide and compliant with the American with Disabilities Act. Reducing the length of the connection also reduces the number of potential conflict points where bicyclists and pedestrians cross vehicle traffic. Currently, there are about 10 to 20 potential conflict points, and this new multi-use path would reduce that to about 3 to 5. On a regional scale, the multi-use path will also provide improved connectivity between the on and off-street active transportation facilities in central Richland and the regional trail systems that provide access to waterfront recreational facilities, to South Richland developments, and to Kennewick and Pasco. Throughout this presentation, you've heard ways in which this project would benefit the Richland community and people traveling through the project area. The project team has described how the preferred solution would allow southbound SR 240 traffic to flow freely and would reduce congestion at several key intersections along Aaron Drive and along SR 240. The southbound bypass lane, along with the roundabout at Aaron Drive and the new active transportation path, would improve safety by reducing conflicts between vehicles and non-motorized users. Finally, the preferred solution would remedy the missing pedestrian and bicycle connection between trail systems in central and south Richland, thereby improving connectivity for people not traveling by car or truck. And now Julie will wrap up the presentation with a summary of the current project status and where the city goes from here to deliver this important project for residents and visitors.
Thank you, Betsy. That was a really great summary. So the current project status and next steps is we have a preliminary design. It's been developed and it works, and the project is ready to progress into a full design and the environmental review process. So what's next is the City of Richland will seek funding to continue this development of design and begin the environmental review process.
All right, thank you, Julie and team, for telling us more about the SR 240 Aaron Drive Interchange Improvement Study. And thank you, Pete and the city, for having us. Uday's here to take your questions now.
Great, we'd really appreciate that presentation from the Jacobs team. And I see again that Carl Berkowitz or Debbie have their hand raised. Also have a question from Mark Whiting. So I'm hoping that Sabrina can probably enable the Berkowitz question first, and then can let us know if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah. Well, thanks to all for the explanation of what we're talking about. And overall, it looks really very exciting. One question, it may have been just that I didn't fully understand it. What would pedestrians or cyclists see as they encounter the roundabout south of Aaron Drive? It was a little confusing. Is that going to be an overpass? Are they going to have to run through 4 lanes of traffic? If you could elaborate on that, I'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so that new multi-use path that is being proposed will have to cross 4 lanes of traffic on SR 240. Although with most of the traffic now being rerouted through overpass, the amount of traffic that they have to cross is now significantly reduced by more than 80 to 90%. In addition to that, since it's a roundabout, all the vehicles that are coming into the roundabout will have to slow down to about 15 to 25 miles per hour, which also improves overall safety. And then eventually it's an underpass that goes underneath the new proposed the ramp connection and connects to the river.
I guess as a cyclist, I still find that of some concern, and I wonder if other options could be discussed before it's finalized, especially among.
I mean, if I might,
yes, Pete.
Mr. Berkowitz, I think perhaps what wasn't given much visibility in the presentation was the proposal to signalize that trail crossing across the roundabout. So
yes.
That idea is in play, and I believe was included in some of the final product design concepts that the Jacobs team developed. Is that true, Dave?
Yes, signalizing.
Yes.
That helps a lot. Thank you very much.
And can I also ask a question, Pete, please? So
yes.
I'm not clear if how the Aaron Drive then heads into 240. Were those there were 2 kind of dimly lit areas that look like they might merge with 240 as you come off the roundabout. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. So the traffic, you're talking about the traffic going westbound approaching 240 on Aaron Drive?
Yes.
So they would have the choices that you have today. You go straight onto I-182 westbound, or make a left onto a ramp that would join SR 240, or turn right and go west on SR 240. So all the movements for vehicles would be as they are today.
Okay, thank you. That's I wasn't sure if those more lightly colored parts of 240 were actually on or on ramps to it, but I guess they are. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Whiting, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Go ahead.
Yes, you got it right. Thank you. Yeah, Jacobs team, thank you for your presentation. I'm glad you're addressing this. I think that intersection there, Aaron Drive and the highways, is just a mess, and it does need to be addressed as soon as possible because the traffic's just getting worse and worse, as you pointed out in your presentation. I'm not a big a fan of roundabouts, as it seems like it seems to be in vogue to do roundabouts these days, and I have a lot of trouble with roundabouts. Step-toe roundabout, I've been in so many close calls there. It's scary. The Kennewick roundabouts are very scary. And I have concerns about putting roundabouts right there, particularly when I think about things like trucks coming northbound on 240, hitting that and trying to maneuver through the roundabouts. A lot of truck traffic there, and then the merging of traffic from Aaron and 240. It sounds like you did simulations or something along those lines for this, but I worry with the amount of traffic that I see now and I would expect to see in the future. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, was there any kind of more radical changes considered for that intersection? One is that, I haven't studied this for very long, like you guys have, but when I was looking at it, it seems like kind of the putting the roundabout there is adding a complexity to a complex situation. And the first thing that I looked at is I was thinking, well, what if we, put a chopped off Aaron Drive and right at Dupertail and directed that traffic down Aaron over to Jadwin and fed that traffic into the highways there. Then you wouldn't have the problem with trying to feed those things together. You've got space in the Jadwin area there. Yeah, that's something to think about, but I didn't see anything like that in your considerations. But one of the advantages that would have is moving some of the problem away from that intersection instead of piling, more capability on top of that. So just wanted to ask about, if you've done some thinking along those lines, and kind of trying to get your response to that.
I'll chime in with that, because we've over the years there's been several significant efforts made to evaluate that interchange and look for alternatives, and some of them I want to say on the order of 15 years ago there was an alternative developed with several different structures to separate movements in standalone ramps and something. What's changed in the intervening years is that WashDOT in our state has adopted a policy that is called practical design, and what that means, when you boil it down, is the solution of a problem with the least cost and the least complexity, and so in order to develop a solution that can gain traction with funding agencies, we're driven to something that is simple and very surgical as it relates to the issues at hand. And so we're kind of in some ways constrained or precluded from drawing a complete blank whiteboard and then essentially starting from scratch and redesigning our world. What we're really trying to focus on is the most surgical and effective use of investments to solve problems. And I think I understand, from various interactions we've had, that some people's comfort level with roundabouts is still less than complete. We did very intensively look at alternatives at this location to maintain the traffic signal, for instance, and concluded with Jacob's work and the WashDOT's work, and frankly our own experience up at Queensgate, that some of these roundabouts can work very effectively, especially when paired with active transportation facilities that allow all kinds of users to use the space. So I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but we've studied this location for quite some time, and frankly are pretty excited that a relatively simple solution can perform so well in our estimation.
Have there been simulations created for that intersection? With
When I'm going to
current
hand to
plan?
Mr. Marapali because he's the simulation expert. I'm going to step aside from that bigger picture question.
To answer your question, no micro simulations were created. We used, if you are aware of the softwares that we used Synchro and Sidra, which kind of use the highway capacity manual standards to calculate the queue lengths and level of service and delay. But if you're talking about like, cars kind of, you can look at a 3D video. We haven't done the micro simulation yet.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions. Appreciate it. Did you have another or?
No, I guess I was. Let me go back to my example of diverting the traffic from down Aaron Drive to Jadwin, because that would seem to me to be a pretty logical place to put access to those highways.
Are you suggesting moving the traffic from 240 onto Aaron Drive on the city street? Or
no, I'm saying that, okay, so you got traffic coming down, what's the name of the street there?
Wellesian Way.
Wellesian, thank you.
Okay.
And so instead of turning right, have everything go left.
Oh, I see.
Down to Jadwin. And then you have a fairly open way to get to the highway, both going north and south. And then all the traffic, then the traffic can go south or it can go north, whichever way. And that's pretty simple.
Pretty simple, but actually impossible. The Federal Highway Administration that establishes the standards for roads like I-182 would not allow access points onto the freeway any closer than a mile. And so we're essentially between George Washington Way and Aaron Drive. We don't have any space to add ramps or access points to I-82 there, and it's a losing.
Okay,
cause.
So they said no. Yeah, all right.
Well, we didn't even ask because we were very. The Jacobs team is probably more familiar than I am, but in interacting with federal highways, that would be a non-starter. So that level of creativity we didn't entertain because of our knowledge of how the federal standards work.
Okay.
I understand your idea though.
Yeah.
And to be honest, about 15 years ago when concepts were generated, there were concepts drawn with different lines in that area, but they were discarded for those reasons that I'm talking about. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have anything come in on the chat, Sabrina?
Just one request, which was when you responded to an earlier question about signalizing that roundabout, whether you meant through the rapid flashing beacons or a true signalized roundabout.
I think our intent at this point is a signal that stops traffic, although that's probably to be determined in detailed design. Great. Okay, I think we're about to launch our last project presentation. This one's about South George Washington Way and was given by Jeff Peters from the Lochner Group. So thanks to the Jacobs team. And Mark, if you would queue up Jeff's presentation, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Jeff Peters, project manager for Lochner. We were selected by the city to carry the South George Washington Way intersection improvements project forward from previous work that had been done. So I'm going to do a brief presentation on what we've accomplished so far and where we are right now and how we're going to move forward. So the goal of the project at this point is to reevaluate the 2014 analysis and alternatives that were developed at the George Washington Way, Columbia Point Drive intersection, collect some current data, traffic data, and active transportation data, determine and produce some future traffic volumes for the intersection using a design year of 2045 with the updated and most recent regional traffic model. And then establish some alternative evaluation criteria in conjunction with the city. Evaluate all those alternatives based on the selected criteria and coordinate all of that and the alternative evaluation with WSDOT to ensure that they're on board with the alternatives and any impacts, and identify any impacts to I-182 and SR-240, and then identify a preferred alternative that can advance to design and construction. The purpose and need for the project itself was identified to reduce congestion on South George Washington Way. As we all know, the PM peak is pretty congested on George Washington Way. So this project was identified to try to reduce congestion there. Also to increase safety and mobility at the Columbia Point Drive, Aaron Drive intersection, and to improve connectivity for active transportation users that are using the regional trail systems, and as well as making it perhaps easier for them to access local businesses. So I'll go through the alternatives that we evaluated and looked at, and some of these alternatives were identified in previous work in that 2014 study, and then some of them were developed during this process. So alternative one is just an expanded footprint of the existing signalized intersection. This is one of the alternatives that was developed previously. And this essentially just adds lanes to the existing intersection, but also includes, a grade separated pedestrian crossing there. Alternative 1A, this is a modified version of that expanded footprint. And this alternative was developed during our process, and it's kind of a smaller version of that. It only adds one southbound through lane and one westbound left turn lane instead of all the other additional lanes. This also includes a grade separated crossing. Alternative 2 is one that was developed previously, and this is the first of kind of the split T configurations where we introduce a new intersection to the south of the existing intersection, and this separates the eastbound and westbound movements into their own intersections. And so this particular alternative did that on the west side of George Washington Way by a new road that would go down the shelter belt and tie into Jadwin Avenue and then Aaron Drive. It would put a cul-de-sac at the end of the existing Aaron Drive. And so it's a completely new roadway, and it also has some, closes some of the connections with Abbott and Adams Street to George Washington Way due to that configuration. All of these alternatives include a grade separated pedestrian crossing. Alternative 3 is a split T, but at the same location. The new intersection would be at the same location, but instead of having the connection go down the shelter belt, it would just loop right around and tie into Aaron Drive, kind of like the current roadway does now. Alternative 4 is the last one we looked at, and this one was developed in the previous studies as well, and was kind of a result of public input. And this moves that new intersection to the north to Abbott Street. So it aligns it with Abbott Street instead of the shelter belt and has a direct connection to Aaron Drive. And this was an alternative that was looked at to kind of minimize impacts to the commercial property there. You can see it on the screen there as L. And so it was kind of an idea to look at how that could work. So from there, we evaluated those alternatives. And to do that, we came up with some performance attributes that we would use to screen all the alternatives and score them. And so we looked at vehicle mobility, economic vitality, safety, relative cost, the active transportation user experience, commercial impacts, right-of-way impacts, environmental justice, which is more community type impacts, and then 4F impacts, which are essentially impacts to public properties like the shelter belt and the golf course and those sorts of things. So we had the city, and we worked with the city and WSDOT to develop these. The city prioritized those and gave them a weighting criteria. And then we went through and scored each of the alternatives on a 1 to 10 scale on how they address those attributes. And so scores, a score of 5 was basically no change, and that's why you'll see across there the no build scenario has 5s across the whole thing. Scores less than 5 means it was worse than the no build condition essentially, and scores higher than 5 were better than the no build scenario. So we went through, scored those, came up with a total score for each for all the alternatives, including the no build, and then ranked them based on their score. And as you can see here, the number 1 ranking alternative was alternative 1A, which was that modified expanded footprint of the existing intersection. So with that, I'll go through and show you a little bit more and talk a little bit more about why, what the benefits are to that preferred alternative. And so again, what this alternative does is adds a new southbound lane that will be both a through and a right turn lane to George Washington Way at the intersection and carry that through the intersection to the ramps. And it creates a new westbound left turn lane on Columbia Point Drive. So the reason for that is because those were identified as the predominant movements that create most of the congestion or delay at that intersection. So this alternative looked at, okay, what could we do if we just focused on that, and would that provide enough improvement? So that's essentially what this alternative does. It does reduce the congestion on South George Washington Way, which was one of the criteria, purpose and need of the project. The additional westbound left turn lane on Columbia Point Drive improves the intersection mobility and functionality, which again was identified as a purpose and need of the project. And then of course the pedestrian overcrossing definitely provides an improved active transportation element to the project and allows for a better experience for active transportation users not having to try to cross at the signal at George Washington Way. Now, at this point in time, we also are still permitting an at-grade crossing at the signal, but this gives an alternative for people that don't want to use that. And the more people that use that, the better the intersection actually functions. So our next steps and where we're at now on our next steps. The project is currently funded and has dedicated funds available to begin the design of this preferred alternative. And so we are in the process of getting started on that. That will produce the detailed design, the environmental permitting, and the construction plans that will be prepared with an anticipation that we're going to start that here in March and be prepared for construction in 2023. The one caveat to that is the pedestrian overcrossing concept is not fully funded at this point in time. So additional funds will need to be secured for that. So we're working through the scope right now and have identified that we will do some preliminary work to make sure that the pedestrian overcrossing fits with the design that we're going to be doing, and there won't be any conflicts, but we are currently not planning on including the full design package for the pedestrian overcrossing in our current plans. So we'll complete the plans, get them ready for advertisement, and it's anticipated that the construction of the intersection and any ramp modifications will begin sometime in 2023. So that's all I have for today's discussion, and I'll be available and hanging around for the rest of this to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Scanning my attendees list, I don't see any hands raised. Sabrina, do we have any questions or comments from the chat?
Nope, you're all good.
Okay. Well, that concludes our program this evening. Our consultant teams are here if anybody thinks of a last minute question, but we're about to sign off. Our communications and marketing group have recorded this and intend to post it on the city's website and make future viewing of this program available. And as I mentioned earlier, all these projects have a presence on the city's website where people can look up and learn more. So thanks very much for those that attended, and good evening.